Long before the light of lanterns flickered, there was a sound of the river. Slow and patient, the Indian River has watched generations come and go. From indigenous people to the first settlers in the 1820s to those visiting today. The 30 buildings that stand in front of you were moved here piece by piece. A hotel where boots once stamped snow and mud on floorboards. A blacksmith shop where the sound of iron and fire once rang. And a church where hymns drifted from souls in harmony. Today, these places are frozen in time and give a glimpse of lives once lived. But when you step inside them, they feel less like a museum and more like a village that's just waiting patiently to reawaken. And then you hear it. First, a soft crackle. Then, music. Like somewhere in the room, a radio is playing.
And it was as if someone had just put on AM radio, and it was just static.
I'm Nadine Bailey, and this is Haunted Canada. Today, we'll be walking the darkened paths of a historic village with Elizabeth King and Hailey Doughty as they share details of their experiences with the spirits of the settlement. This is the Lang Pioneer Village Museum. There's a certain kind of quiet that settles over old wood. It's not the silence of emptiness, but the stillness of memory. That's usually what you'll first notice when you arrive at Lang Pioneer Village Museum. The seasonal destination is almost a 2-hour drive from Toronto, near Peterborough, in the heart of cottage country. Long before pioneer homes and wooden storefronts dotted the landscape, this area was home to its original inhabitants, the Mississauga, also known as the Mississauga, who are part of the Anishinaabe peoples. The land itself was known as Nogojigwanong, an Ojibwe word meaning place at the foot of the rapids. That's because the museum, with more than 30 restored buildings gathered from surrounding townships, can now be found along the banks of the Union River and help tell the stories of early settler life in rural Ontario. And long before there were museums, before there were gravel pathways and interpretive plaques, there was a forest. In the early 1820s, settlers arrived in what was then Upper Canada. As I've mentioned in previous episodes, families were lured by the government with promises of land grants and farmland, which eventually grew to become Peterborough County. They came by wagon, by foot, by canoe, and got to work. Winters were brutal. Illnesses spread quickly. In these early days, medical care was limited, and infant mortality was heartbreakingly common. Life wasn't romantic. It was hard and relentless. But settlers managed to clear the towering trees and rocks to build homes, churches, and businesses. In 1846, the Lang gristmill was constructed of solid limestone along the quiet curve of the Union River by Thomas Short, and he was more than just a wannabe miller. He was a 19th century merchant, entrepreneur, and later Member of Parliament for Peterborough County. Ambitious and industrious, Thomas Short understood the power of water. He used a limestone that was quarried locally to build his mill along the river, to harness its steady current to grind wheat and barley into flour for the surrounding communities. Farmers traveled miles in horse-drawn wagons and lined up along the riverbank to have their grain milled. The air would be thick with the scent of ground flour and damp stone, the building vibrating with the relentless turning of gears and grinding stones. Within 5 years, Short expanded his business enterprise. A sawmill was constructed across the river, and he laid out a village plot that he needed in Allendale. By 1858, the Allendale Flour Mill, which also housed an oatmeal mill, had grown into one of the largest milling operations in the region, and the small riverside settlement thrived thanks to it. However, just a few years later, in the early 1860s, Thomas Short encountered financial difficulties and declared bankruptcy. In 1862, he lost possession of the mill, and a decade later, both the village and the mill were renamed after William Lang. The mill endured setbacks, including a devastating fire in 1896. The interior was rebuilt by W.J. Humphreys, and remarkably, the operation continued. Generations of farmers continued to bring their harvest to the mill to be ground for more than a century, until 1965, when the mill ceased operations. Today, the limestone walls still stand along the Indian River at Lang Pioneer Village Museum. They are weathered, watchful, and rooted in the same soil from where it was built. In 1967, during Canada's centennial year, the Lang Pioneer Village was established, with the grist mill as the original structure. Other buildings from the surrounding area were later donated and added to the Lang Pioneer Village Museum site, which stands as a vibrant 19th century settlement brought back to life. It spreads across 25 scenic acres and is home to more than 30 restored heritage buildings, which are framed by gardens, livestock, and the rustic charm of a bygone era. Hailey Doughty is the museum's operations coordinator, and she said the museum did not appear overnight.
A lot of times when people come to the site, they assume it's just a village that's always been here, but it's actually not. There's really only one original building, which is our big grist mill, and then the rest have been brought here from different locations. Some have been reproduced on site. So, we have a heritage building that we base it off of, but we span from 1820s all the way to around 1910 if we're a little lenient on our last build.
Elizabeth King is the museum's operations manager, and she said the buildings were mostly donated from the surrounding area.
We run right beside a river, and as Hailey said, we've got the one main mill. It was a grist mill, which was the original building that was on the site. And I think that's pretty much why it was chosen.
They needed a pretty large site and the mill was here, and it kind of forms it perfectly if you think about it with the river.
To give you some perspective, they started with 12 buildings and we're now up over 30. So that size-wise gives you some perspective of the site.
The first buildings relocated to the current site include the Milburn House, Doughty Town Hall, Glen Alda Church, Meany General Store, and the South Lake School, all names that were once known across the region.
It was a combination of buildings being donated because they were looking for homes for these old heritage buildings that were just going into disrepair or were going to be demolished. So the interesting thing about all the buildings that were brought here is that they all come from different townships around the county. So the county of Peterborough is an upper tier municipality. We have 8 townships within the region, and each township sort of supplied a building. And then there were, of course, some extras. So that was kind of like the start of it all. We started with some examples are the Milburn House, the Doughty Town Hall, Glen Alda Church, the Mini General Store, South Lake School. Those are all names of little towns within the area. Also, interestingly, we also got the Fife Cabin, which was sort of like the cornerstone of the village at the time.
The Fife Cabin was home to David Fife, who was born in Scotland and immigrated to Otonabee, Upper Canada with his parents in 1820. He would go on to plant wheat seeds he got from a friend in Scotland. Most didn't survive, but the ones that did produced plants of better quality than previously available. The strain, eventually known as Red Fife, was also popular in the United States and was introduced to Manitoba about 1870, ranking as the leading variety there from 1882 to 1909. David Fife's Wheat went on to be designated a National Historic Event by the Historic Sites and Monuments Board of Canada in 1931. Elizabeth and Hailey said it's one of the many buildings visitors can step back through time at the Lang Pioneer Village to see what life was like in the past.
There's just over 30 if you count some of the smaller ones like our ice house and our ash house. I should add to another reason the building, one of the reproduction buildings was put on site, was all around an artifact. And it was we have a jacquard loom, which there are not very many of in North America. And when that artifact was given to us, it sort of prompted a campaign to have a weaver shop built on site. So that's an example of a reproduction building that we have based around an artifact, essentially.
So a jacquard loom in Europe it really all came from Napoleon. He basically saw these beautiful fabrics that were being created in China, and he wanted them so badly. So the idea came about because he put out to all the French people essentially kind of what today would be a contest of, I want someone, an inventor, to create these items. How do I create it? How do I do it? Because looms at that time, they were not advanced enough. So jacquard was a weaver. Well, he wasn't a weaver at that time, but he was an inventor, and he came up with the idea of using punch cards. So it is essentially just kind of what old style cardboard would have been, and there's holes, and the holes line up to the needles. And when there's a hole, like binary 0 and 1s, hole means pull a thread. No hole means we don't pull a thread. And it was very popular. It grew very quickly. Industrial Revolution went huge with it. For Canada, it was very short-lived. That's why we have so little of them, because one, they're very expensive, but also two, it was so quick. I mean, Canada, if you look at its history, it kind of is advanced in the fact of how quickly we moved from being settlers in a little cabin to all the way up to now we have carriages and things. So the jacquard loom is huge in popularity in this fact that you don't need as many people to run it, and it creates beautiful fabric. If anyone's ever seen it, it's got a beautiful one side, imagine it's mainly red as the background, white as the accent, and then it's very common for a jacquard loom. If you're looking around for fabric, the back will have the opposite, the reverse of that. So we are very lucky to have one that's back to being operational, and we have a wonderful team who's worked at making it so that we have one that can actually run and do punch cards.
Hailey said the museum is a place for students to learn, for families to explore, and for visitors to better understand the many layers of history that shaped the region.
So we're open May to September for our spring, summer season. So during that time, we are what's called a living history site. So when people come on site, it's not a traditional, you walk in, you see exhibit panels, you're really transported back in time. So as soon as you go into the village, you're hearing, the blacksmith hitting his anvil, you're smelling the smells, you're hearing the things, you get to immerse yourself in the history. So when you go into a building, you get to see heritage baking happening. If you go into any of our trades buildings, the printer is actually printing things for our upcoming event. Or if you're going into the business, you can buy things from the general store. Not artifacts, but you can buy things from the general store. So you're seeing people in the fashion of the time. You're getting to see the mechanics of that time in the trades. You're getting to really go back in time.
As it is with many historic sites, curiosity doesn't end with the artifacts on display, because these are authentic structures with real history. And with them, perhaps some things tend to linger. In recent years, Elizabeth said, paranormal investigators and ghost hunting groups have begun reaching out.
I think it might have been, maybe 2016 or 2017. And we were actually approached by an outside group. So it's a group out of the Durham region called the Paranormal Seekers. And originally when they reached out, I was in the event coordinator role, and I went to the manager at the time and said, look, we've had this ask. We'd never had anyone ask anything like that before. And he was a little bit trepidatious, but he did tell me, go ahead, meet with them, see what they have to say. So I brought them on site, and immediately we were impressed because they were the ones that led the conversation around, like, we just kind of want to come and see, but we don't necessarily have to tell if the stuff that we find is not great, or maybe we won't find anything. Like, they didn't know what to expect. And they were very open to us kind of keeping the reins and steering where things went. So because they were so good to work with and easy to work with that way, we hopped on board and we had our first sort of paranormal investigation evening, where they came in and they did some investigating. Yeah, the experience was just so good that we continued to work with them, and we actually continue to work with them to this day.
So, what can visitors expect when they visit? What should you look out for if you're seeking your own experience with the paranormal? It might come to you as a surprise, but for Elizabeth, some of the most unsettling moments have taken place inside the visitor center.
It itself is not the oldest building on site. In fact, it's fairly modern. It was built in 1983, but it houses our collection. And so the whole back end of the building, which looks like a giant barn, has about 60,000 historic artifacts in it. And we hypothesize that perhaps that is why there's so much activity in this building, despite the fact that it's not one of the older ones. So the main offices for all the staff are in the upstairs of the building. And it's hard to describe without seeing it, but there's a couple long hallways. And when you're working in the office space, you can't see the hallways, but you're close enough that you can hear them. And there are constantly noises going on. It sounds like footsteps walking by. And I even go so far as to say that, like, you can be sitting, I have in the past sat in my office and heard someone say, hello. And here's me thinking someone's here going, hello? Like, who's here? And there's nobody here. Like, I'm the only person, and it's 10 o'clock at night. And I quickly grab my purse and run to my car and leave. I've never seen anything at this site. It's more just like hearing, feeling. But I do know, like, we've heard from other people, and I'm not sure what Hailey's experience is, but in some of the historic buildings, there have been sightings.
There's something about old buildings. They absorb moisture, heat, smoke, sounds, and sometimes stories. One of the buildings at the Lang Pioneer Village that is known for strange encounters is the Keene Hotel. The 13-room hotel was a gathering place in the 1800s, a stop for travelers, farmers, and tradesmen. Inside, boots once stomped off snow, conversations carried across candlelit rooms, deals were struck over meals and ale. Hailey said today there are reports of footsteps. They are measured and unhurried. The kind of footsteps that suggest someone who knows exactly where they're going.
There was one volunteer who had mentioned that they were, just making sure no one was still in the building. The lights are off. Mm-hmm. And it looked like someone there's our parlor. And then just off of it's kind of like a little room that you could powder your nose. And it looked like someone's foot kind of slicked back in, like someone was in there. Mm-hmm. And of course, they're thinking, well, someone's gone back there. The dark building went back and there was no one there. So that's the only one that I've heard in the hotel. That's the visual. We hear a lot of we had a time where the upstairs of the hotel was shut off just because as heritage buildings happen, there's repairs that need to be done. And there was a ceiling repair. So we had to close off the upstairs, but not to the point that it was boarded up. There was just a rope at the top of the stairs, and people would walk in and swear that someone was upstairs sweeping and sounds like that. Nothing ever, very just home sounds. But that one tends to have a lot of people feeling a little eerie, but I don't know if that's necessarily because it's a big 1870s house with lots, but it's always, from my experiences in any of the feelings, it's almost just kind of like they're coexisting. I get it. If I was in that time and I was a ghost and I saw someone wearing the clothing I was wearing, I of course would make sounds and move around because it just seems like somebody's in your hotel. Maybe they're just excited that a guest's there.
Yeah.
Hailey said that every time someone checked the upper floor, it was empty. No wind strong enough to move the floorboards. No animals trapped inside. Just silence. But the Keene Hotel holds a secret beyond what lives inside it. The building is one of the only ones that has electricity. For nighttime events, the village is lit by candlelight and lanterns. But on occasion, staff will use spotlights for accessibility. And Elizabeth said during one of those nights, she had her own encounters with whatever lies inside the old hotel.
I was the assistant manager then. We were the last people to leave at the end of the event, and we had gone through the village. We were turning off the power and the lanterns, and the last thing to do was pull the plug on the power at the Keene Hotel. So we did that. We locked the door and we're walking. The hotel's halfway through the village. So we're walking back to the main building and all the lights come back on. And we thought that the facilities guys were playing a joke on us and that they actually had snuck back in and had turned it back on us. And when the person at the time, Lori, and I got back to the building, there was no one in the building. The door was still locked. And somehow it had been plugged back in. Like, it didn't feel scary. Like, there's no, like, sensation of evil or dark or, like, it's kind of playful or, hey, I'm here and you're in my space as well, or I'm in your space, like shared space.
Let's pause here. There are two common theories when it comes to hauntings in historical spaces. The first is what paranormal researchers call a residual haunting or energy. That the idea that emotionally intense events leave an imprint on a location, replaying it like a recording. There's nothing interactive, nothing conscious, more like an echo of a past life. The second theory suggests intelligent hauntings, where spirits are aware of their surroundings. As Hailey and Elizabeth shared, their experiences at Lang Pioneer Village are subtle. Footsteps, shadows, cold spots, a sense of being observed. Nothing overly aggressive, nothing theatrical. For Hailey, working at the museum is more like keeping whatever has remained company.
And I'm sure too, if I was in a house and stuck to a house and it was in a museum and people were keeping my house up, I'd be pretty happy. I'd be like, this is great. Look at my house. I get people to come view it. Like, I'd be pretty excited. So yeah. I'm sure there's an aspect to that too, where there's like a almost thankfulness behind it. I mean, I find it when I go into the buildings, I'm always, as I said, I call out to everyone who's in there. I'm like, oh, hey, how's it going? I'm just in here. I'm sure from the outside, people are like, oh, there's Hailey talking to herself again. Yeah. But no, it's always, as Elizabeth said, very welcoming feeling.
Now imagine the village after closing. The last car pulls from the gravel lot. The costume interpreters change back into modern clothes. The doors are locked, one by one. The only light left is the moon reflecting off the Indian River. The pathways are dark, and the buildings stand in stillness. That's when Elizabeth said there had been reports from their neighbors of strange occurrences at the Milburn house.
When we're not on site or everything is shut down, the Milburn house sometimes looks like there's a candle in one of the rooms and they'll see it from the window, but there isn't actually a person in there. I don't know. Maybe you could explain it by glare, although, like I said, we're pretty rural and there isn't electricity, so not sure what light it would be coming from, but we do sometimes get neighbors tell us stories about seeing a candle in the window or looking like something's going on in the building, but there really isn't.
The house was originally purchased in 1877 by Thomas Milburn, the grandson of one of Smith Township's earliest settlers. Hailey said it became the home he shared with his wife, Sarah Jane Mann, and their 5 children.
So the Milburns are pretty influential in Peterborough County. They're one of the first families that were in the area. So we get Milburns all the time. It was quite fun. We've had it in the past that we've had ancestors of that house have staff here for a little bit. So it's kind of neat to see that connection. But yeah, so they're very deeply rich in this area. So they definitely have people stopping by. The family themselves, from what I understand, they're mainly just in the farming to begin with. That was their main thing. But I mean, at Lang, we are representing that rural agricultural history. So that tends to be throughout what the link back is too. But they were a farming family, and that home was on the property. They ended up making another home, which is very common. And then that's when it was donated over to us.
Although its rough log exterior dates back to the 1830s, the inside reflected the growing comforts of the late 19th century, which means it has coal lamps, a water pump, a sewing machine, and 2 stoves that help warm the family's bedrooms. Compared to other homes at the museum, the Milburn house offered a surprising level of luxury for its time. Today, it's not just the neighbors who have reported paranormal activity. Hailey and Elizabeth said staff have also been startled by strange things inside the building.
It just feels like you're at like grandma's house in there. And I feel it's that like residual feeling of like, there's just someone in there just living their life. But similar, like you'll hear sounds, another upstairs in a building. Like when I was a seasonal staff, that was constant. People would say like, oh yeah, Miss Milburn's just up there. You can hear her moving around. But again, same kind of thing where it's just, you know, it's not happening, but there's that kind of knowing that it's like, somebody's here. I don't know what they're doing, but they're here.
When the paranormal group comes, they often pick up a lot of stuff in that house as well. And one of the things that I've heard them talk about, and we do share publicly, is the story of seeing a man in uniform in the building. Like the mediums have picked up a man in uniform in that building. And we have done a little bit of research into that. And my understanding is that there is a son who was in one of the wars,
Yes.
World War I.
Yeah.
You might know the history more than me.
Yeah, his name was Noble, and he ended up, I believe, being killed in war, and that's the connection to it, that it was one of their sons. Yeah.
So we often wonder if maybe that is that man in uniform that they're seeing. It could be Noble. I don't know.
The Milburn house, as I mentioned, is one of 30 buildings on site, each one with its own story. And it isn't the only one with a connection to the paranormal. Hailey said she has her own complicated relationship with the Fitzpatrick house.
Now, I often joke around that the Fitzpatrick and I don't get along. It's not anything bad. Like, this ghost definitely doesn't, maybe the ghost really likes me, but anytime I've been in there, like, weird instances will happen where, like, things fall or things like that. But I feel like a lot of people, it's another home. I feel like when people go into a building that's a home, it's often assumed, especially when it's heritage, that there's probably someone sticking around, especially generational homes.
The Fitzpatrick house represents a settler's second home and was built by Michael Fitzpatrick in 1848. It is a large, story-and-a-half, squared log house with a 6-foot wide stone fireplace used for both cooking and heating. The main living area includes a kitchen, off which is the parents' bedroom, and a parlor used for weddings, funerals, and visitors. Children were not allowed in the parlor unless invited, as this was the very best room in the house. And there were plenty of children. The census from 1861 listed Michael and Susan as having 8 children. Upstairs, there were 2 bedrooms, one for the boys and the other for the grandmother who lived with the family. A large utility area also served as a sleeping space for the girls. Hailey said this is one of the earlier homes to be moved on site.
I had an experience one time, and I'm still very skeptical of what it was, but we do in the winter months our Heritage Christmas programming, and I was there and I was opening up the building, and I walked in, and it's this big communal area, and then there's a parlor, and then there's the parents' bedroom, and I walk in and it's like a sound, and we had an event the weekend prior, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, there's a propane kind of thing. It was that propane kind of right before you light the barbecue sound. So I'm walking around the house and I'm like, what is going on? I walk into the parents' bedroom, and beside, as Elizabeth said, we don't have electricity in all of our buildings. There's this little like boom box, and it's lit up and it's doing just static sound, and I'm thinking, how long has this been on? It's been freezing. And I bring it inside, and I'm joking with the facilities guy who is on, being like, did you go in there and turn it on? He was like, no. And he was fairly new at that point, so he wasn't at the point to like make jokes. Yeah. And I was like, well, it's so weird. And he started to look at it and he goes, Hailey, there's no batteries in this. And I went, you're kidding. And he was like, no, like there's nothing in it. And it truly was lit up, and it was as if someone had just put it on AM radio, and it was just static. And I immediately was like, I don't want this doomed boom box anywhere near me, because I already had this history with this building. And ever since then, I will go in there and I'll be like, hello, Fitzpatrick, I'm just coming in to do this. I don't need you to talk to me today. I appreciate it, but I'm okay, because in the moment I was a little spooked, like, oh.
While both Elizabeth and Hailey have experienced many strange and unexplained moments throughout the Lang Pioneer Village Museum, it's inside the Duro Hall where one of the most unusual occurrences have happened. Elizabeth mentioned musicians experienced something truly unique.
We've had visitors say that they can kind of feel or see a presence in there. But the most specific example of that, we used to do music workshops in that space where we would have musicians come and they'd be learning banjo, learning guitar, like acoustic guitar. And they shared one time that while they were just jamming and playing, they all had sort of a shared experience where a presence came in and sat down in one of the empty chairs and was listening to them play and there for the jam session, and then just got up and wandered away after. And so that would have been probably like 5 or 6 people in the room, and they all had that kind of like, this definitely happened. And so again, I didn't witness it, but I've heard the story told, and they've shared it quite a few times with other staff and volunteers. So that was a public building. It would have been a town hall, basically. I can actually say the most chilling experience involved an apparition that appeared during a music workshop. Multiple musicians saw a figure enter the room and sit with the group. Though no one recognized the figure, the presence in the room has been remarked upon by both visitors and staff, adding to the eerie atmosphere of the space.
It's important to remember Lang Pioneer Village was built to preserve history. The structures were relocated with care. Artifacts were curated. Stories documented. The goal was education. And yet, preservation has a curious side effect. Whether you gather objects that were once used daily, you create a concentration of lived experiences. Visitors often describe feeling transported, as though stepping across a threshold shifts something. Perhaps what we interpret as haunting is simply immersion. The mind fills the gaps. The creak of timber becoming a footstep. The flicker of shadow becomes a figure. What gives it atmosphere is something quieter. Accumulation. Generations of real lives represented in wood, iron, and glass. Whether the sounds and shadows reported are tricks of acoustics or echoes of the past depends on what you believe lingers when a life ends. Perhaps history doesn't haunt us. Perhaps it simply waits in the stillness for someone to listen. Thank you for joining me as we explore the Lang Pioneer Village Museum, and a special thank you to its Operation Manager, Elizabeth King, and Operations Coordinator, Hailey Doughty, for taking the time to talk with me. I really do appreciate it. Have you visited Lang Pioneer Village Museum? Did you experience anything unusual? Share your story with us for a chance to be featured in a future episode. If you want to check out Lang Pioneer Village Museum, I will link their website in the show notes. Haunted Canada is sponsored by the Edmonton Ghost Tours. I will link the website in the show notes. Haunted Canada is written and produced by me, Nadine Bailey, with senior producer, Dila Velasquez. Production and sound design is by Rob Johnston, with help from Corey Price. If you'd like to support this podcast, please follow, share, and tell a friend about this podcast. We would also appreciate a like and a 5-star written review. Also, you can follow me on our different social media platforms, including TikTok and my YouTube channel, Haunted Canada. Do you have a ghost story, haunting, or true crime about your house, a museum, or resort, anywhere really, that you would like for us to cover on this podcast? If yes, you can email me through the website, hauntedcanada.com. And one big announcement, I have some exciting news. I will be hosting a haunted and paranormal tour of Ireland in August of 2026 in partnership with my friend Joanne at Expedia. We will be visiting haunted locations, staying in haunted castles, and exploring many historical places while delving into ghost hauntings and paranormal activity, so be sure to bring your EMF readers. I will be able to provide more information soon, but till then, keep checking hauntedcanada.com, where I will post about the tour, a detailed itinerary, and how you can book. I can't wait to explore Ireland with you. Remember, space is limited, so book early. Thank you from all of us at Haunted Canada and Curious Cast. Have a good night, everyone, and stay haunted.